Right. So this afternoon, I'm really thrilled to be joined by Mark Evans. So for those of you who may not know Mark, they'll be surprised if that's many, but anyone who doesn't. So Mark is co-host of the really popular The Places We Will Go marketing show. And this is quite fun, actually. I don't know if it's fun or nerve-wracking for kind of turn the tables around. So Mark, I'm really thrilled that you've been kind enough to join and kind of answer some questions. And we'll kind of go through those, but I think it'd be useful just to give a quick background, if that's possible. So if I may, just to kind of bit of context for our kind of audience here. So you've got your Places We'll Go marketing show. We'll speak a bit more about that. You've had some amazing guests on there. So Mark Ritson, Philip Kotler, load of senior industry professionals. In fact, at one of our recent events, when I said, which podcast did everyone listen to? They all voted for yours. And then, am I right in saying that now you've got very much a kind of portfolio career and a busy one at that, by the looks of things?
Well, yeah, that's right, Suzie. Firstly, thank you for having me on. Great to be here. And that's very flattering to hear about our podcast that Richie and I have co-hosted for 3.5 years now. It's been an absolute delight. And I know you'll share this view as well, which is it's a real privilege to be able to interview people in this sort of context. And yeah, the world's pretty colourful now. So having jettisoned from the corporate career, if you like, in late 2022, for the last 18 months, I've been doing a portfolio career, which other people describe as being a plural or, I don't know, those sorts of terms. For me, it's a fruit salad, and which means I have lots of fun, lots of learning, and get to help more without I suppose, the drudge of some of being inside a corporate, and certainly less of the stress. But that means I can combine coaching senior marketers in the main. I've got a trustee role, a couple of chair roles, a couple of NED roles, all fairly small, all these different parts of the jigsaw puzzle. And then also I do a lot of board advisory work. That's probably the mainstay, which is retained to be wise, hopefully, and give good advice to a number of different companies. I love it. I mean, I maybe should have done this years ago, but it was quite well planned. And I'm now thinking that hopefully I'll have the best decade of my career, where, as I said, I can have more fun, more learning, and help more.
And did you find that that was something that sort of naturally evolved? Because to put this in context for anyone who's not familiar with your sort of career prior to that, I mean, you had some very, very senior roles, HSBC, obviously Direct Line, those were kind of MD marketing and digital roles. So they're very big roles. How did you make that? Did the transition just evolve naturally into the portfolio career?
There's a bit of a sequence to the whole thing. So without telling the full story, back in the day, on the night of my graduation, some very meaningful, impactful, and profound words led me to believe that life was about achieving success and significance simultaneously. So there's a balance to be had in life, which I think is, we were probably talking about purpose a couple of decades ahead of time. Yeah. And in 2014, I went through the Marketing Academy Fellowship, which was really an epiphany year. Then 2016, I founded a charity. And that was the first time where I realized that at this intersection of success and significance lies abundant creativity and resourcefulness. And it made me realize I could use my skills in many different places. Then I started to accumulate a few more voluntary roles, this, that, and the other. And then in 2018-19, a new CEO joined Direct Line. And at that point, I was quite clear that my next role wouldn't be another internal role, wouldn't be a CEO role. It would be moving into portfolio. And from that point on, it was actually relatively well orchestrated. I took an advisory role with HMRC. I became chair of the School of Marketing, which then spawned the podcast, a few other things. And so come 2022, it was very well signaled, pretty well planned. And I'd already started to reframe, I suppose, my inner workings from an ego, because we've all got one, that was fueled by the corporate trappings of an exec role,
yeah,
to something a bit more purposeful and largely around helping others. So don't get me wrong, the flavor of the fruit salad is probably quite different to what I'd imagined, but the principle of being independent, being more helpful, being a bit more entrepreneurial and freed from some of the shackles that come with the corporate world, that bit was actually fairly smooth in terms of my thinking. And I always thought that kind of when I hit 50, I'd want to do a bit of a reinvention, 25 years of, the corporate stuff. And I can use and reappropriate all the skills and experiences and in many, many different ways, and ultimately have more impact.
It sounds like it helps you kind of find purpose. I mean, we see a lot of people who sort of go on, they get to the very top of their career, and then they look to have some real breadth and have a portfolio career. And that can often bring a real sense of satisfaction and kind of renewed purpose. It's like a second whole career in some respects. Looking, kind of diving into to our kind of questions, and I guess looking at it from the very beginning, if you like, what led you to a career in marketing in the first place?
Honestly, I didn't even know marketing was a thing at university. I studied economics. The careers advice was that half of you will be accountants, half of you will be bankers. I was 100% clear I didn't want to be an accountant, so I thought, well, my only option is to apply for banking roles. And I landed a graduate job with what was called Hill Samuel Bank, which was a subsidiary of TSB, so in corporate finance, which I wasn't 100% sure about. I didn't think I was necessarily a brilliant fit. Anyway, I was quite pleased to get the role, but I deferred it for a year to do a sabbatical post in the Students' Union at Nottingham. So sports president, sport is kind of my thing. And during that year, which was the best year of my life, my graduate job disappeared in a puff of smoke. I was made redundant before I'd even started. Before I'd even set foot in the building, all the interviews were on campus.
Yeah.
Which was a bit of a kick, but I actually pretty quickly came around to the fact that I was saved from probably a pretty average career in banking. And certainly, it's quite a slog, that industry, certainly corporate finance. And so the whole marketing thing was a complete happy accident. And second time round, I didn't listen to the career service. I mean, the truth is they were largely right, but I didn't listen to that. And instead, I talked to some people who are now 1, 2, 3, even 4 years ahead, because they were maybe older and had played rugby with them, and they were a bit older. And all the ones in sort of banking and finance seemed a little bit miserable. And all the people who were working in marketing with Unilever and Mars and P&G, they were loving it. And so I thought, okay, there's something in this. And so I did a lot more research. And then I applied for Mars, in part because it was still a general scheme, but probably had a dot to marketing. But I got to work in sales, I got to work in manufacturing, I got to work abroad. Before, at the tender age of I think 26, I actually started in my first proper job in marketing. So, I'm not necessarily a believer in fate in all regards, but I think it was meant to be that I didn't end up in banking, and then everything else afterwards has been a beautiful, happy accident.
Well, it sounds like it worked out really well for you in that respect. We've spoken already about the portfolio roles and things. Let's talk about your marketing show, The Places We'll Go, because it's hugely popular. How did it come about? And are there some kind of key highlights from the shows to date that you might share with us?
Yeah, well, it was a bit of a chance conversation with Richie. So I chair the School of Marketing, Richie's CEO and founder. And he was started to do a podcast in the very early days of lockdown. And he interviewed me, and we said at the end, well, maybe we should do this together. And little did we know that was our secret formula, because when it's a co-host thing, it's so much more effortless.
Yeah.
And you can actually relax and enjoy it. You don't have the cognitive load of orchestrating an individual interview. And so it was just the seed of an idea, and we thought, well, let's give it a go. It might last a week, it might last a few. And we got Mark Ritson on the very first show. That was kind of him. There was actually an electricity blackout in Tasmania, so we lost him for about 10 minutes. At that point, we thought we might be jinxed, but it was fine. And then we just kept going, and we found it was easier to get bigger and better guests, and our pitch, I suppose, improved, and we got some really good people on. And so again, it was, which I suppose is a theme that's emerging, pursuing an instinctive, entrepreneurial, serendipitous path. But ultimately, the cause of why we thought we should do our podcast, what's the why behind it, was that we were hearing people in the early days of lockdown saying, this is all a breeze, we're loving it, we've got more balance. And under the hood, we know that everybody was struggling quite a lot.
Yeah.
And, we're having sort of quite a lot of existential questions coming up. And so we thought, well, if we can interview really brilliant people who have achieved amazing things, but find out the real story when it didn't go so well, when they had to show resilience, when they had to go not just plan A, plan B, plan C, but and so on, that we could sort of normalize squiggliness, but also give people hints and tips and advice, particularly to the next generation and particularly to the underrepresented elements of the next generation. So kind of inspire, inform, normalize. And what we found was that we became really good at setting a context where people could relax, enjoy it, learn a bit about themselves, but give the gift of their wisdom in a very relaxing way. And so I think, you know, we worked pretty hard to get that, worked hard to make it quite relaxed and safe. And so, yeah, we've had all sorts on there, and it's probably been, you know, it's my highlight of the week, Friday morning, 8 o'clock. And we don't over research it now because we just sort of let it roll a bit, but yeah, it's been a joy.
Well, and hats off to you. And I think the way you do it's extremely positive. You can tell people feel comfortable and open. It's fascinating. It's really, really interesting one to listen to. Any key highlights other than obviously having the blackout with Mark Ritson on the first one?
Yeah, I mean, lots actually. Some real sort of jaw-dropping stories of strife. James Brett, who you know, had a really, you know, lots of horrible things go his way, and he's turned that around to create a charity called Plant for Peace. Even recently, Dan Ariely, who, you know, very famous behavioral scientist. I really didn't know his backstory. If he had 70% burns when he was 17, and has had decades of pain, and how that has affected his perspective on life. And human behavior and human understanding. I mean, there's been so many, but perhaps having the likes of Philip Kotler, Byron Sharp, Mark Ritson, the real, well, I suppose, celebrities of marketing, to come on and not actually talk about marketing theory hardly at all, really to talk about what makes them tick, and the way they think about the world. So that's been brilliant. But it's also the surprise element. David James, who I've known very well, and I realized I only knew 10% of what he was about and how entrepreneurial he is. He looks like a very conventional CMO, but you know, he invented air pillows for air travel, you know, pillows for air travel, for example. So it's the unexpected nature of it all, which is the best part.
Do you see many common threads that come through those conversations? Because these are highly successful people. They've often overcome adversity. The sort of common themes.
Yes and no. So very individual in terms of the way they think about the world and themselves. But there are some common threads in terms of typically relatively low ego. Not always, but typically. And to a large extent, we recruit along those lines. So maybe that's a bit of a selection bias.
Yeah.
But I mean, always a large element of curiosity. And I remember one of the best bosses I ever had, Bruce McColl, he was global CMO of Mars for a decade. He said that curiosity is one of the most important factors in any successful marketer's career. There's always a brilliant insight just lurking around the corner that could transform a brand or a business or even a sector. You just need to be curious enough to go and find it. And I think for marketers, but more generally for successful people, curiosity, open-mindedness, positivity, glass half full, where's the opportunity in the problem rather than problem in the opportunity, a mindset of possibility, very much a common thread. And then combined with an element of resilience, because really successful people have nearly always had setbacks. I remember Annette King, the headline for hers was from secretary to CEO of 17 companies, because she literally, to get in the door, she became a secretary in an agency and then worked her way up and up and up and up to great success. So an element of resilience, and that's the bit that we really like to focus in on. You know, when it wasn't so good, what happened? What did you do? What was the outcome? To give us all hope that, you know, when it isn't all perfect, that's okay. In fact, that's probably what makes you better and more successful in the long run. So for sure, resilience.
I would agree with that. You know, I look at all the briefs that we get, and particularly in the last 12, 18 months, all of those C-suite briefs, when you look at the emotional intelligence piece, every single one wants someone who has got resilience. And I think it's a character trait that you see in, you know, successful people, and you build it. You know, it's only through experience, isn't it, that you kind of you learn and layer it and build your own resilience. It's really, really important.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to be careful quoting Churchill these days, maybe slightly, but I do love the quote, success is not final, failure is not fatal, it's having the courage to continue that counts. And that's it, you know, seeing and hearing from people firsthand when they've lost everything. They've lost their wealth, they've lost loved ones, they've lost their health. And yet, a couple of years on, they've achieved even more than they otherwise would have done. That's the inspiring thing, the fortitude of human beings to overcome adversity. You know, James Brett, yeah, it's all in the public domain. Sexually abused, alcoholic, drug addict, depression, bankruptcy, cancer 3 times, mother committed suicide. I mean, a catalogue of things, and yet you've never met a more positive-minded person.
Positive mindset, and I would say the common thread with people, like that, is you never give up. They pick themselves up and they just keep going, and that's the difference, isn't it? So they just don't give up.
Yeah.
Speaking more about, you're obviously interviewing lots of really senior professionals within the marketing space. Any thoughts or tips that you've picked up from them in terms of what priorities might be for senior leaders over the next 12, 18 months? We're seeing so much change at the moment. I'm always curious as to, what's on the agenda for the senior marketeers, and wondered if you had any thoughts.
Yeah, well, so I have a pretty good perspective on this by the fact that I do work across a number. So I coach a large number of CMOs and know a lot of CMOs through the Marketing Society, the Marketing Academy, and through my coaching. And so I'll take that question away from, what's the technology play or what's happening in the market or in the wider industry, to talk about the fact I think a really critical thing is that senior leaders, even more so than before, really need to look after themselves. And so actually that shows up in my coaching a bit, in that, yes, there's some practical knotty things to fix, but also thinking a bit more holistically about the human being and their well-being and health. So, I'm a nutter for Wim Hof and ice baths and breathing techniques and so on, because I think the senior leadership just got a lot lonelier as a result of the pandemic. It was always a lonely thing. It is, there has to be a necessary degree of relation. And it's very rare that if you're an executive, you're best buddies, genuinely best buddies with your exec peers. So it was always lonely. But I think even more so now because of the more virtual nature. And even though there's a bit of a pendulum swing back to the office, I just see, I part of the Marketing Academy Fellowship alumni is running a cohort of MDs and CEOs who were previously CMOs. And when you talk to them, the general sense is, I feel lonely, I feel isolated, I'm constantly lurching from one crisis to the next. I don't feel very popular. And generally, I'm not actually that happy, which is quite sad to hear in a way. But it means that, if we recognize this, then, and it perhaps true for everybody, taking care to look after yourself. And I love the quote attributed to many, many people, seemingly, but be kind. Everyone you meet is fighting a great battle. And I think that's true of ourselves as well. We need to take notice of that. So, I'm hoping in this chapter of my career, I can have a bit more of a balance than the extreme stress and long days that comes with corporate life. Don't get me wrong, I loved it. It's actually quite addictive, but maybe there's a different way. Maybe there's a more balanced way. So I'm actually just watching all the Kung Fu Panda films again, to go and watch Kung Fu Panda 4 on the weekend. And all those key messages and insights in Kung Fu Panda, inner peace, be the best version of yourself. I think they're very true. So it's a long way of saying, I think everyone needs to think a bit more holistically about their careers and their lives.
Yeah, it's interesting that you're seeing that as you do your coaching and the senior people you come into contact with. It's yeah, I would wholly agree on that. So kind of looking forward, what could we expect to see from your show through this year? Any exciting plans?
Good question. Well, so we've got ever more people lined up. We actually now book almost sort of 8, 10, even 12 weeks ahead, because people rarely say no, which is very flattering. So we've got lots of great guests still to come. And we'd hope that maybe if we could get a couple of Olympians on the back of, and Paralympians on the back of the Olympics, that'd be good, because again, that's my sport coming through. But the other news is we've got, I think, 157 interviews now. We've got some amazing content. So Richie and I are thinking about, oh, there's a book in there, or there's some books in there somewhere. So maybe we'll go multi-channel with it. And if we could package up some of those amazing insights, maybe into sort of quick reads, a little mini chapter on each individual, then we're just chewing on that, because I think there's so much richness in there that might be a gift. I'm told you never actually sort of make any gain or money out of writing a book. That wouldn't be the point. It would be to sort of make it even more accessible, to take all of that content into something easy to dip into. Richie's published a number of books, so he's a bit of a past master. I haven't, so that might be a bucket list item for later in the year.
Fantastic thing to aim for later in the year. You got any dream guests that you'd love to have on the show?
Oh well, I mean, we yeah, I mean, either of the Obamas would be amazing. Obviously, that's reaching for the stars a little, but we have got quite a long list of famous people that we would like to have. But I don't want to give too much away or promise. But we are stretching our wings, and now a little bit more into the US as well. Get some really big heavy hitters. So I guess I'll just have to say, watch this space for now.
How exciting. Mark, thank you very much for giving up your time today and going through those questions. Pleasure to chat with you, and wish you, Richie, and the show every success for the year ahead.
That's very kind. Many thanks, and thank you for this opportunity.
Absolute pleasure.